Welcome back to the Lingo Flamingo. So, if you're just starting out on your research journey, it can feel like you're learning a whole new language, right? All this terminology can seem super intimidating. But don't worry, today we're going to demystify all of it. I'm going to walk you through the main types of research and give you a really simple framework to understand and maybe even design your own studies.
And yeah, we have all been there. You crack open that textbook, stare at a page of jargon, and just feel completely lost. But here's the secret. Behind all that dense academic language, there are really just a few big fundamental ideas. My job today is to help you see those clearly. So let's break it down together. By the end of our time together, you're going to have this awesome mental toolkit. You'll be able to look at pretty much any study and just get it. You'll understand its core parts. So let's jump in with the first and maybe the most basic distinction you'll ever need to make.
Okay, so at its very core, almost all research can be sorted into one of two giant buckets. The very first question you should always ask yourself is this: is this study built on words or is it built on numbers? And that brings us to our first key pair, qualitative versus quantitative. Think of it like this. Quantitative research is all about counting and measuring. It gives you the what in the form of cold, hard numbers. But qualitative research, well, it explores meaning. It gives you the why behind the numbers through stories, themes, and all that rich human context. This example shows perfectly how these two approaches are partners. The quantitative data tells us a critical fact. Wow, 70% of students are stressed. That's a huge number. But that number alone doesn't tell us how to help. That's where the qualitative data, the actual stories from students about exams and sleep, gives us the deep insight we need to truly understand the problem. One tells you the scale of the fire, the other tells you where it started. And it's so important to remember that neither one is better than the other. They just answer different questions. In fact, many of the most powerful and insightful studies actually combine both. We call this mixed methods research, and it's all about getting the most complete picture possible. All right, so once you're figured out if you're dealing with words or numbers, the next layer to peel back is about motivation. We need to ask, what's the fundamental purpose of this research? Why is it even being done? This is the huge difference between basic and applied research. Think of basic research as pure exploration. It's driven by curiosity. It's about expanding the map of human knowledge just for the sake of knowing more. Applied research, on the other hand, is on a mission. It's laser-focused on solving a specific real-world problem. And this example with DNA is just perfect. The useless basic research back in the 1950s, just figuring out the shape of a molecule, directly paved the way for the world-changing applied technology of CRISPR gene editing decades later. So here's the takeaway. Basic research is the deep, foundational well that applied solutions draw their water from. Let's move to our third distinction, which really gets into the nitty-gritty. We've covered the type of data and the purpose of the research. Now we need to look at the method. How is the study actually being carried out? And here, the big split is between observing and intervening. Descriptive research, just like the name says, simply watches and describes what's already happening. You don't interfere. Think of a wildlife biologist watching animals in their natural habitat. Experimental research, though, that's where the researcher takes an active role. You deliberately change one thing to see what happens to something else. If there's one word I want you to burn into your brain here, it's manipulation. Actively changing a variable, whether it's giving a new teaching method to one class or a new medicine to one group of patients, that is the absolute defining feature of an experiment. It separates it from just watching the world go by. And why do researchers go to all that trouble? To establish causality. This is often the holy grail in science, to move beyond just seeing a connection between two things and to prove with confidence that A actually causes B. That ability is what makes experimental research so incredibly powerful. Let's look at this caffeine example. A descriptive study can only tell you that caffeine intake is related to higher scores. It's a correlation, but you can't prove causation. I mean, maybe students who study harder just happen to drink more coffee? But in the experimental design, you control everything. By giving one group caffeine and the other a fake, a placebo, you can prove that it was the caffeine itself that caused the improvement. That's a massive difference. All right, home stretch. Our fourth and final distinction has to do with time. Is the research taking a quick picture of a moment, or is it filming a long, epic movie?
This is the difference between cross-sectional and longitudinal research. A cross-sectional study is that snapshot. It's quick, it's efficient, and it gives you a great lay of the land at one specific moment. A longitudinal study is the movie. You follow the exact same group of people over a long period of time. It's a huge investment of time and money, but it's priceless for understanding how things change and develop throughout a lifetime.
So, we've covered a ton of ground here. We have these 4 pairs of concepts that help us sort everything. But how do we put them all together in a way that's actually useful when you're staring at a new study?
Where do you even begin when you're faced with a dense research paper? Or even more exciting, when you're starting to brainstorm your own project? How do you cut through all that complexity and make sense of it?
You start by asking these 4 simple questions. I want you to think of this as your research decision tree. First, words or numbers. Second, is the goal new knowledge or a practical solution? Third, is the researcher just watching or are they stepping in? And fourth, is it a snapshot in time or a story over time? If you can answer those 4 questions, you can understand the core of any study.
So let's run through that one last time. First, the what, qualitative, the why, versus quantitative, the how many. Second, the purpose, basic for knowledge versus applied for a solution. Third, the how, descriptive to just observe versus experimental to find a cause. And finally, the when, cross-sectional for one point in time versus longitudinal for the story over time. Internalizing these 4 pairs gives you a powerful lens to see all research through.
So now I'm going to leave you with this. Using this framework, I want you to think about a topic you're genuinely passionate about. Think about the kind of study you might design. What is the fundamental question that your research will answer? Happy researching!